This is my 2005 Honda Element, and the starter's making a weird noise, so we're going to take a look at it. And I'll show you what that noise is right now. Alright, listen for this. Yeah, so I doubt that noise is good, so we're going to take a look and see what's going on. When you pop the hood on your Element, you're going to wonder where the starter's at, like I did. Usually the starter's at the back of the engine because it obviously engages with your flywheel. So this is the back of the engine, the front being where the pulleys are at. Clearly the starter's not there. The back of the engine's over here where your intake manifold is. But you can kind of see there's nothing that looks like a starter there. So the starter is actually kind of in the middle of the engine. It's underneath this plastic thing, and it's underneath your intake manifold, this aluminum intake manifold piece. So the first thing you're going to do is we're going to pop this guy off. These are 10 millimeters, this one and this one. Here's what the engine looks like with the cover off, and the starter is behind this intake manifold. So I need to develop a plan of attack, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this hose off right here by that clip right here. This looks like a vacuum hose of some type. All right, next I'm going to take this sensor off right here. So put my hand underneath it a little bit, and then I'm going to push down on this tab and kind of wiggle it like this. Like that. All right, in the same location, I noticed there's a screw that fastens this plastic piece, this like wiring kind of cable conduit piece to this intake manifold. So I'm going to take that off. It's also a 10 millimeter. All right, it's super tight in here, so definitely need two hands. One to hold your socket, and the other one to turn your wrench, because this thing's super tight. So my car's actually been crashed, so I don't know if this is tighter than a normal Element, but it's you don't have a lot of space between your fans and the engine right there. And that little screw looks like that. All right, the next piece that needs to come off, I think, is this piece right here. It's got these two 10 millimeter screws, and your throttle cables, two throttle cables are attached to that guy. One's for your accelerator and one's for your cold idle, I think. And so let's get those guys off. All right, now I'm using a swivel on this guy because it's a little bit tight. Let's see how it works. All right, these two screws look like this. Put that guy right there for a second. Actually, you know what? I'm not. I'm gonna put it over here on my truck. And then this piece right here is just free to wiggle, so that's good. You know what I forgot? I forgot to take the battery off. You should always take the battery off when you're working on something, just in case you don't actually touch your positive or any other thing that's positive. It's a 10 millimeter, and take the negative off. Again, don't take the positive off, because if you're wrenching on your positive and like your wrench touches your, just say, the car, then you're gonna get a spark. And I've definitely done that. You've probably done that too if you try to take the positive off. All right, so I think it's time to try and take the throttle body off. So there's four 13 millimeter screws. They're like screws and nuts on this guy. I've already got my long extensions on my socket, and we'll try and get this guy off. All right, it's become pretty obvious that I'm gonna have to get this intake tube out of here, because I'm never gonna get the throttle body off without getting that guy out of the way, because there are nuts on there, like that guy right there. That's a nut. The throttle body's gonna have to come up and over that stud. So this is a 5 millimeter on your intake hose or tube. Get the hose clamp out of the way, and we'll get this guy off. All right, like my daughter says, come on, man. I can't get this tube off the throttle body, so I'm gonna take the hose clamp off. Hey, take the hose clamp off this side, and we're gonna pull the whole plastic tube out. You know, I'm having a lot of trouble with this thing, so I just decided to take this whole tube off. You got this little clip right here. Take it off like that. Just push it in, take it off. This piece right here, you can either take it off this side, or you can take this whole tube off. Take this whole piece off of the tube, which I did, but I put it back on. And then you got this guy right here, which really is hard to come off. I tried pulling on it, it's not coming off, so I'm just gonna leave it on. I'm gonna pull this whole tube piece over to the side, kind of like that. All right, now just because I didn't want to do anything weird, I took the harness off the throttle position sensor too. I don't think that's needed, but I wanted to just get out of the way. All right, well, I'm taking these 4 fasteners off the throttle body. I want to mention that it's not a 13 millimeter, it's a 12 millimeter. I was wrong. My 13 millimeter was slipping. And I'm just using a long extension and a swivel down there at the bottom. All right, so now it was a little tricky, but I had to get these 2 right here, these 2 little plastic connectors out so that I could pull this wiring cable piece away. So there's this connector on top, which is blue, and there's a connector on the bottom, which is gray. You have to get your needle nose pliers out and get on the back side and push both those guys through without trying to break without trying to break anything. Anyways, it's a little bit difficult, but you can do it. All right, so we got one more piece I'm gonna try and disconnect, and that's the wiring harness on the bottom here. It's that gray harness right there, and that's underneath your throttle body. So that harness is your throttle control harness, I think. And the point is, I just want to move the throttle body out of the way. I don't really want to take it off. It's connected to the coolant as well with those 2 lines right there, and I don't really want to take those off. I just want to get it up and out of the way. So I'm going to try and reach my hand down there and get that gray harness off. All right, that's definitely not the easiest thing to do, but what you got to do is you got to get your finger on the back side, push up on that tab, and then pull that harness off just gently. I'm also going to push that little plastic wiring harness, not wiring harness, but that cable connector piece right there in the middle of the screen. I'm going to push that guy down, get that guy away. All right, now it's time to get that intake manifold off. So it looks like you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 down there. Either screws or nuts, I don't know, we'll find out. These are also 12 millimeter. So I'm gonna get on those guys and pull those guys off. Well, hey, so what I wanna show you here is there's actually one more nut on the bottom of your intake manifold, and you have to get it from the bottom, which means you gotta lay on your back, look up upside down, and there it is right there. But this is the tool I use to get it off. So you can see here, it's like 18 inches of extensions put together. It's ridiculous. I can't believe they designed it like that, but that's the way it is. So get down, lay down, and you'll see it, and take it off. So there's one last screw we gotta get off too. I'm up underneath the car, and there's my wrench, this 12 millimeter box wrench on the head of something right there. We gotta get this guy off so that the whole bracket can come out. All right, now here's the intake manifold out of the car. That's the front of it, that's the back side, and then here's what the engine looks like. But what I want to show you right now is that's that bottom right there in the middle of the screen. That's that, I can't do it. That's that bottom bracket that you need to take that screw out of. It's right there in the bottom. All right, here's your starter motor tucked back inside your engine, and the first thing you're gonna do is pull off this connector right here. Looks like that. And then you're gonna pull off your boot over your hot power, and you're gonna get a 13 millimeter box wrench. Put on that nut and get that nut off. All right, next thing I'm doing is I'm putting a 14 millimeter socket on that long, kind of weird shaped bolt on the back, and I'm gonna get that guy out of there. So I was having trouble with that smaller socket, so I put an adapter from my 3/8 socket to a 1/2 inch socket so I can get a bigger wrench on there, and that worked. Now we're gonna get this bundle of wires out of the way, so just pull up on this tab right here and pull like that. So one more sensor I think I want to pull off. That's on this guy on the back side of this motor here. Put your finger on the back side, push in, and pull that guy off. So on this other bolt, it's a 17 millimeter bolt, and mine was really tight, so I ended up just putting again, I got my 1/2 inch drive, and I put a cheater bar on the end of it so I can get that thing off. So here's what these 2 starter bolts look like. And you should notice that the only good thing about this tray, this plastic thing that's on the top of the engine, is you can use it as a tray to hold your bolts. And here's what the starter looks like. And I kind of noticed that if you look at the teeth, they don't look like they have a good wear pattern. Like, they should be shiny all over, right? So you want the teeth to be fully engaged. But you can kind of see here the teeth are only like 1/4 engaged, maybe 1/2 engaged, which is definitely not good. So while we're down here, I just want to peer inside there and look at those, the teeth on my flywheel, just for fun. They look pretty good. All right, so I got my replacement starter here from AutoZone. I got the more expensive one because I don't want to do this job again, hopefully. So some things I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this thing together back in the reverse order, which I took it apart. Should be fairly easy. We just follow the steps. Number one, I'm gonna use anti-seize on all my fasteners. Number two, I'm not gonna use a torque wrench. I'm just gonna do the torque I feel is right. Number three, I am not gonna use new gaskets on my intake manifold or my throttle body. I'm just gonna reuse existing because they look okay. And number four, I'm gonna put some silicone on some of those little tubes on the intake tube that I took off, just so we can get a good seal. So I got the starter back in. It's actually hard to get those two bolts to go in, so you gotta play around with them a little bit. But I snugged them up, and then I used a box wrench on each one to check them. But then also I put some copper-based anti-seize on the starter, the thread, that copper screw that sticks out of the starter, because copper is a good conductor, and so I figured copper-based anti-seize is probably a good dielectric. So that's what I did. All right, now that we got everything hooked back up, we got our sensors back on, we got our wirings kind of put back kind of in the right spot. We are going to hook the battery back up, just like that, quickly. And we're gonna turn it on to make sure the starter works. And what you're gonna see is that it turns on crazy. All right, so it works. That's good. All right, what I want to show you about the intake manifold is that there's that stud on the bottom that you got to take out from that piece right there, that little bracket piece that was eluding me when I was taking it out. So I'm gonna put some anti-seize on that one and put this guy back in. All right, so I got some anti-seize on that stud, also on these two studs that stick up here. And also, before I put this guy back in, I'm gonna check the face. Make sure it's nice and smooth, which it is, but just make sure it's nice and smooth because you want to see if you have any gunk stuck there and clean it out. All right, so we're upside down now. I'm looking at the bottom of the engine, and that bottom fastener is really proving to be difficult to get on. So you got to get your long extension, your 18-inch extension, and kind of come in between the cross frame of the car and the front, like underneath the radiator, and get a swivel on there and get that thing on. I'm going to tighten this guy up first. All right, so I'm putting this thing back together, and I noticed the screw started to bottom out a little bit too early, and it just felt tight. That one and that one right there. Okay. And anyways, and so I noticed the screws for the intake manifold are shorter than the screws for the throttle body, so make sure you don't get those mixed up. The throttle body are longer, and the intake manifold are shorter. So in a situation like this, where you've got a flat bolted joint, I'm going to treat it like a sticker. I'm going to tighten it from the inside out. So I'm going to go like snug inside out and then full tight inside out, both ways. So before you tighten your throttle body back up with your 4 12mm sockets, you need to make sure that your throttle cables line up in the grooves of these little like pulleys. So just make sure they do. And again, I'm just going to go nice and snug on these, nothing crazy tight. So the thing about these joints between the throttle body and your intake manifold and your intake manifold and your other piece is that they're just sealing vacuum pressure. Think about it, your intake's sucking air pressure. So you can't have anything more than 14.7 PSI difference because you got 14.7 out here and you got something less in here. So all you're trying to do with this connection is just seal that pressure differential right there with your gasket. So that's why you don't need crazy torque. 14.7 PSI is not that high pressure. And that's why you don't need a big bolt and you don't need crazy torque. Now, when I say I just snug it up, I'd make several passes on each one to make sure they're tight. And I just do that because I'm kind of OCD. But my snug is probably pretty tight to the normal person. So before you start to put that tube on to connect that piece to that piece, just make sure you got all your electrical connections clipped up. You got a bunch of them. You got this one here. You got this guy I'm gonna save for later. You got the gray one in the back. And I think that's it. All right, now with the intake tube still off, I wanna show how, I think next time if I have to do the starter, I'm just gonna try and take the starter out through the bottom of the engine. Because if you have this tube off, you can kind of reach the starter through this gap right here, through these gaps, And also you can reach the starter through the bottom of the car, and we'll talk about that at the end. All right, so on this tube right here, this one right here, so the top left, I pulled it out and it doesn't look like it's gonna seal very well when it goes back in. So I'm gonna put some of this silicone on this connection before I stick this guy back in. All right, so on these hose clamps, I'm not even using a wrench on the end of my extensions. I'm just using my hand because I don't want to over tighten these guys. Another thing I want to note is I couldn't pull this guy out of here, but I could separate the two pieces right here pretty easily. So last thing you gotta do is tighten your battery back up. And again, you don't have to be a hero on this, just nice and snug. I've seen so many of these things broken, so I don't want to do that. Just nice and snug on this guy. And make sure that all your little wires and cables are connected before you put that cover piece back on. So this is how the starter looks from the bottom of the car, and it helps when you have a new starter because it's cleaner and you can kind of see what's going on. But you can kind of see how you can get to it from the bottom of the car. It's going to be difficult to get to the that positive connection, that positive wire connection, as well as the top bolt, but I think you can do it. Like I mentioned earlier, there's holes in the intake manifold and stuff, so I just want to show you everybody what that looks like, and that next time, if I have to do it, I'm going to attempt to do it, because worst case scenario, I can't do it, and then no big deal, I'm in the same place I'm at now. All right, last thing you gotta do is make sure it starts and that it idles properly. The idle's gonna start out high, and then make sure that it comes down to normal. It doesn't have any funky idle. I've had a lot of problems when you're messing with a throttle body where it doesn't idle properly, so just make sure you check for that. And that's all.